So the Super Bowl just ended, and there's been a lot of discussion already about how it ended. And it's interesting that we do this at the end of almost any football game, or we say certain things at the end of games, kind of ignorant to how this whole thing gets remembered, right? And the first aspect of I want to talk about this is like, why, even though none of us were cheering for the Eagles, why did that penalty really bum us out? And two, what does it mean for the impact of that game and how that game would be remembered? Because I think people have been dramatic in that sense, talking about that. But first, like, why did the penalty? Because I think, like, for most of us watching, unless you had money on the Chiefs or you're a Chiefs fan, and even for some of us who are Chiefs fans that had money on the Chiefs, right, who had an incentive to root for what happened, kind of was like, don't like that. And the reason we feel that way is because we want to see football games decided by football plays. It's why we hate, like, that game ended in the most anticlimactic way. A game that had been about two quarterbacks going head to head was decided by a referee and a kicker kicking a 6-yard field goal. Like, boo. You know, a lot of people want to act like the NFL scripted. Bullshit, because that's a terrible ending if that's wrote, right? Like, so that alone throws all that garbage out the window. But it's just like, that's not how I want to see a football game decided. I didn't care which team won, to be honest. But I did want the game to feel like it was decided by football. And that is the problem that we have with officiating. It is the problem that we have with some coaches where the game just, like, doesn't get decided by football enough. And I think this is one of the things where you look at some of the other leagues, right? The XFL and the USFL that are trying different things. The XFL more so than the USFL, but they both have this in common where those are leagues that, hey, your experience by watching a single game could determine whether you care about this league at all, because it's not the NFL. So they want to make sure that every game you watch is at least decided by football. Now, they go to different lengths to make that happen, right? The USFL just does a better job with, you know, officiating reviews and, like, making sure that everything is looked at quickly and all that. Like, they have a good review process. The same thing for the second iteration of the XFL. I would assume it's probably going to be the same for the third one, which I think they kick off too this weekend. But another thing the XFL does is they don't have extra point kicks. They make you go for 1, 2, and 3 on the field. They penalize kicking and punting out of bounds, right? They make that game so it's as hard as possible for that game not to be decided by football. The NFL has not made such adjustments because the NFL just hasn't had to, right? The NFL in this country, at least, is number 1, 2, 3, and 4. When it comes to sports and market share in this country. I run 2 channels that can survive in the off season because the NFL is just that popular. It's a different level, right? So they don't have fear of the XFL or fear of the USFL or fear of the NBA to really, like, fix some of these things or have the sense of urgency. But I do think that staying on top should be just as much work as getting on top. And for them, I see this as a win-win. As you look at what these other leagues are doing with officiating, you should at least consider that. Now, you don't got to go as far as I want to go, right? Where we start getting rid of extra points and really decentralizing some of the special team stuff that ends up deciding games. I think more and more football should be determined by football, right? Like by lining up 11 on each side and running a play. Like, that's football. Not kicking it. Like, that's stuff that we added, but the core game of football should decide a game. And if Jalen Hurts would have gotten that ball back down 3, he could have done something legendary and became a fixture in NFL history, or he could have done something, not so legendary, became a meme. But he was robbed of the opportunity. And unfortunately for Jalen Hurts, this happened a lot to him. Like, let's talk about this real quick. Like, Jalen Hurts, I feel bad for him because, like, if you look at his national championship / Super Bowl games, he's never had a bad one. He just didn't have the moment, right? The first one he got into when he was a freshman, he played against Deshaun Watson. The man made the game-winning drive. Deshaun Watson just made a better one. It wasn't that one. Like, Jalen Hurts couldn't do nothing about that, man. The second one he got to was the one where they got to overtime, and they put Tua in. And Tua, despite making multiple mistakes in that game that should have got him put back on the bench, magically throws a bomb to Devonta Smith to win the game. So Jalen Hurts, again, even though you won, did you really? You didn't get that moment, right? And then in this Super Bowl, he's all primed to finally get that moment. Down 3, I'm going to drive my guys back and show everybody that I'm the dude. I ain't never been able to be that dude to get the last moment. And the rest were like, nah. So that stinks for Jalen Hurts. That really does stink for Jalen Hurts. And the part where I think some of the reaction has gotten a little bit overwhelming and overboard is where people are like, this game's going to be forgettable now. No, most games, and look, or the commentary where it's like, hey, this game's going to only be remembered by this penalty. And that's true. That's going to be the main thing we remember about this game. But most games worth remembering are remembered by one play or one moment, or you know what I mean? Like, or one condition. We don't have the bandwidth to be remembering like 4 quarters of football instantly when we think of a game. Like, that's just what it is, right? We look at the 2001 Fiesta Bowl where Ohio State beat Miami. It's kind of a similar situation where that game, a lot of the discussion is going to be about the penalty. But then once you start talking about that game, we start talking about what happened in that game. Willis McGahee injury, Chris Gamble was balling. And then you run into the whole situation where there was the pass interference play that didn't get called. But a lot of that conversation like, oh, look how good that Miami team is. And I'm a dude that was born in 1995, and that game was in 2001. And I know that much about it because it clearly wasn't lost. Like, all the details of the game was a loss. That's just how we're going to jump back to that game. Same thing with the Super Bowl. We're going to remember this Super Bowl because off jump, it was bangers after bangers after bang. Like, the whole game was just back and forth. I ain't never seen something like that in the Super Bowl. And then the penalty call happened, and we'll talk about Jalen Hurts had like 3 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns in that game. We'll talk about Pat Mahomes on the injured ankle, but that game's going to be remembered as a defensive holding game. The same way that there's that one game where I think was it Isaac Bruce. I am sorry, I'm having a brain fart, but you know the miss by no, it wasn't Isaac. That was the Rams. It was the receiver on the Titans. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. He was actually a really good receiver for his time, but he came up 10 inches short. That's what that game's remembered for. All the other detail comes up when you talk about that game, right? Philly special, all of these games, they're going to be remembered by one thing. That's not an indictment. That's just kind of how things go when we're talking about the NFL. We're talking about football or any game, right? Baseball has the bloody sock game. That's a condition that we remember about the game. The flu game in basketball, the shot in basketball, the drive, the fumble. You see how we tend to only remember these things off the top of our head, or name these things or canonize these things by one play, right? Like, that penalty changed this from being the Jalen Hurts game or the Pat Mahomes ankle game to the penalty game. But that game was so goddamn good that it ain't going away. We're going to remember that game. We're going to be talking about that game forever. Like, that game is going to be deep. deeply etched into the memories of everybody who watched it, because it was one of the most fantastic Super Bowls. Unfortunately, that Super Bowl didn't get the ending it deserved by being decided on a football field. It had the opportunity. You know what it was? It was a match. Like, if you watch wrestling, this will make sense. But it was a match that was just banger after banger after banger. You got dudes, Jeff Hardy jumping off a ladder. You got the Young Bucks just coming in there doing 360 flips, 460, 860 flips. And it is incredible. And then The Miz comes in and wins the match or something like that. Like, just something unmitigatingly mid happens at the end of the match. It's like, come on. That's what happened. But we still remember the match. But that's my thoughts. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have a good night.